What happens when the very systems designed to protect us from floods, like insurance, mapping, and government policy, end up leaving the most vulnerable communities behind? The solution, as today's guest reminds us, is to pair big data and policy with something too often overlooked: the lived experiences, knowledge, and wisdom of the people on the ground. Hey, everybody, I'm Stephen Shower, and welcome to Stories Sustain Us, the show where we explore the personal journeys behind some of the world's most pressing sustainability challenges and the people who are working toward solutions. In today's conversation, we'll travel with our guest across continents and cultures as she shares how growing up in Japan, studying in Abu Dhabi, and working in Australian climate policy led her to Stanford University, where she now researches flood resilience and equity in California. We'll talk about the tension between top-down climate policy and grassroots realities, what communities really need when it comes to disaster preparedness, and how curiosity and collaboration can build a more hopeful, resilient future. I first met today's guest last month at a national conference in Chicago, where she spoke about advances in communication and engagement for reducing flood risk. I was struck by the clarity and passion of her message, and I knew right away I wanted to bring her story to you here on the show. Hannah Melville-Rea is a PhD candidate and Knight Hennessy Scholar at Stanford University, pursuing an interdisciplinary degree in environment and resources. Her research focuses on practical, community-based approaches to improving flood resilience and access to insurance in areas that are often overlooked. Raised in Japan by Australian and New Zealander parents, Hannah developed an early interest in how different countries prepare for and respond to natural disasters. She's passionate about bridging science and policy to help reduce the impacts of climate-related events on vulnerable communities. Her journey from the rice fields of rural Japan to international climate talks and now to the neighborhoods of California reveals why true resilience is built from the ground up. Let's dive into this inspiring conversation with Hannah Melville-Rea here on Stories Sustain Us, where we are inspiring action through the power of storytelling. Hannah, welcome to Stories Sustain Us. How are you doing this evening?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I appreciate you coming on the show. I just kind of did the introduction and mentioned that I met you at a conference not too long ago. So thank you for coming around and jumping on the program with me. I kind of start with telling everybody I'm in Seattle. They know that. The folks who watch the show already know where I'm at. But where are you at these days?
I'm in California too. I am, well, not too, but on the West Coast, same time zone.
Yeah.
I just came back from Australia on Monday, so glad to be on the same time zone as you. But I'm in Stanford's campus, so have a very beautiful view right now of Lake Lagunita.
Nice. Well, hopefully the jet lag is you're kind of already back in the West Coast time. That's a big flight. I've done that a few times. That's a big cross ocean flight there. Well, so let's get to know you a little bit, Hannah. Tell me, I know a little bit of your story because our brief conversations in Chicago a few weeks ago. But where'd you grow up? You have a fascinating story. So yeah, what was your childhood like? Where'd you grow up, and how'd you get to eventually land in Stanford?
So my mom is Australian, and my dad is from New Zealand, and they met in Japan in the early 90s. So at the time, Japan was kind of booming, going through its big economic miracle. And so they were teaching English at the YMCA, ended up getting married in Japan, had my sister, then me. So I really grew up in the kind of outskirts of Osaka, between Osaka and Kyoto, in a fairly kind of rural-ish village with rice fields, and I went to the public Japanese school. I was the only non-Japanese kid at my school. And so I think I got to kind of grow up having, in some ways, a typical Japanese experience. And I think the Japanese education system is fascinating, and I'm very glad that I got to have that in my upbringing. You know, every day you have cleaning time, for example, or you all go down and collect your food and you serve each other food. At some point, I think in grade 5 and 6, we got to plant rice by hand, and some of the kind of local farmers taught us how to do that. And then in the 6th grade, we got to harvest it and then prepared a meal with that rice, and we invited parents to join in that. So there's some really kind of special moments growing up,
Yeah.
and I think because my parents were Australian and New Zealanders, they didn't really speak Japanese fluently in the way that I kind of like natively grew up in it.
Yeah.
So I had this translating role constantly between my parents and them. And sometimes I was really embarrassed by what they would do because they just didn't get it. But I think it really, in the end, was so helpful because I was constantly seeing things from 2 different perspectives.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think even in the kind of environmental world, which I now occupy, like I think about in Japan and the cleaning and the rice farming and that element being kind of strong. But then at the same time, my parents would say things like, oh, like there's just so much plastic packaging, you know,
Yeah.
or in my school, once a year they would actually serve whale meat in school lunches, and that at home would be quite contentious. And
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
you know, I remember like having whale meat in the 5th or 6th grade after one of my aunts had just like told me about how horrific she thought the industry was, and just like crying because I
No.
didn't want to eat it. So I think there's like some kinds of cultural clashes and
Absolutely. Yeah.
confused identity that I went through growing up,
Yeah.
but also really gave me this dual lens that I could see things through.
Yeah. That's and triggered a memory for me. The only places in Japan that I've been to is actually Osaka and
Oh, wow.
Kyoto. So I was kind of imagining as you were sharing your childhood, mixing my memories with your storytelling, going, I could see that cultural tug of war, push and pull
Mhm.
of the westernized kind of culture that your parents probably had from Australia and New Zealand versus some of the Japanese culture there. I'm sure I'm sure it still sticks with you to this day. I mean, it's your formative
Yeah.
years. That's what kind of created you. So, how long then did you stay in Japan? All the way
All the
through
way
high
through high
school?
school.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
yeah.
My mom ended up teaching in an international school, and then I was able to do high school in English. There was a period of time when I was in English second language classes because I had been in Japanese school for, so
For
long.
so
And
long,
then
sure.
at 18, I moved to Abu Dhabi for university.
Yeah.
So I went to NYU, has a campus in the UAE, and I attended that school. At the time, I think I was probably in the 5th or 6th graduating classes, still pretty new,
Okay.
but had just like amazing scholarships. And I was, yeah, really excited to kind of go for that opportunity. And I think it really expanded my worldview in ways that I don't think I could have anticipated. Coming from Japan, where, it's very much a dominant one culture
Yeah.
in many ways, and
Yeah.
it's ethnically, I think, 98% Japanese. And in the places that I lived were probably even more
Yeah.
predominantly Japanese. Moving from that to then the UAE, where like the country itself is about 80% migrants. And my university there was about 250, 60 people in my year. And within that, there's like 70 to 80 different nationalities,
Wow.
uh,
Yeah.
75 languages spoken. And I think that was just like completely expanded my world. And suddenly I was living with people from countries sometimes that I hadn't heard of before. I'd like certainly never been to. It's my first time in the Middle East. I studied Arabic while I was there, and the food, just like so much new food and culture and language. And so I think that was also an extremely transformational
No
period of
doubt.
my life.
Yeah. Can I take you back to Japan for just a minute? Something
Mm-hmm.
you had said triggered a question I'm just curious about. With the predominant, the 98%, Japanese, almost a monoculture on the island there, and you obviously being part of that minority,
Mm-hmm.
1 or 2%. Um, how evident was that to you growing up? I mean, you were growing up, going to Japanese schools,
Mm-hmm.
learning the language, being, immersed in the culture, and having that push and pull we talked about just a minute ago. But were you treated
Mm,
differently? Was that something that you experienced as, immigration's a hot button topic
yeah.
all over the world right now, and here you were you were the immigrant in Japan. How did that, do you recall, any experiences, or were you accepted and that was just you were, just not Japanese, but you were accepted into the community that you were living?
I mean, I think a bit of both. There's an extent to which, even if you're born and raised in Japan, if you don't look Japanese, you're not seen as Japanese.
Sure.
I think that I was in some ways quite lucky that I didn't get excessively bullied. My sister actually got much more bullied than I
Oh,
did in
wow.
school, and she ended
Yeah.
up switching to the kind of international school system much
Okay.
earlier than I did.
Yeah, yeah.
I think I just happened to kind of go to kindergarten with the kids who were maybe like the toughest. And then we kind of entered
Grew
first grade
together.
together,
Yeah.
and so that shielded
Yeah.
me somewhat.
Wow.
But most people who are not Japanese, even if they're half Japanese or Japanese who have lived overseas and moved back to Japan, I mean, there's definitely a lot of cases of bullying that
There's
I'm quite
tension there.
aware of.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I think in some ways I was just kind of insulated and lucky. And I think my character also was a little bit feisty as a kid. And I had like a little bit of a diva quality about me. And so, I don't know where that confidence came from, but it did serve me well growing up. And then it wasn't really until, so I actually went to boarding school for 2 years in New Zealand between the
Okay.
ages of 14 and 16, because
Okay.
never had the chance to kind of get to know my extended family. And so
Oh, sure, sure,
I
sure.
lived with my grandparents over the weekends, and then I went to kind of boarding school. It was a public girls' school, but they had a small kind of boarding component.
Yeah.
And that was the first time that I felt like I grew up and I'd always told people like, oh, like I'm from New Zealand and Australia, because they ask you where you're from because you don't look Japanese.
Right, right.
And then moving to New Zealand and thinking I think my expectation was, well, for the first time in my life, I'm going to fit in
Yeah,
like
you're gonna
visually
belong.
to a
Yeah.
place.
Yeah, yeah.
And so maybe my expectations were too high, but I ended up, entering this boarding school as a 14-year-old midway through the year, and realizing that really I didn't have that much in common with these girls that I was now
Sure.
living with. And people would ask me, where are you from? Because my accent is
Yeah.
quite mixed up, and it has kind of American influences from living in Japan and having US media growing up.
Yeah.
So then I was like, well, where am I from? Japan? And so
Yeah.
I think I had like,
Wow.
and in different periods of my life, I've kind of like changed how I answered. Where are you from? I think in university, it was the first time at NYW where it was just such an international community, and there were so many people kind of like me who had different experiences in different places,
Yeah.
that I could say, oh, I'm from Japan, and no one would blink an eye,
Yeah.
and that would just be like, oh, cool, yeah. So that's the only place that I think that was, not really questioned. That said, now it's been 10 years since I've lived in Japan. And I think now I'm in a phase where I feel more connected to Australia, because that's where my parents and my sister live.
Yeah.
That's where I'd lived right before starting my PhD. And so I think kind of home, the concept of home is constantly kind of changing and evolving and
Yeah.
moving in some ways with my family. So yeah, it's not a simple answer, I think.
No,
It's a
that's very complex.
common
Yeah.
question that I sometimes sends me into a little bit of a crisis on how to answer it. And I have
Yeah.
my like simple answer, and then like, okay, do you really want to get to know
Yeah.
me kind of answer.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing all that, because yeah, I really do want to get to know you, and I appreciate the complexity of it, and those I'm imagining were some challenging times for a young brain, a
Mhm.
child, to kind of figure out that, that sense of belonging is such a deep human need,
Mm.
so having, to navigate some of those types of issues at such a young age, and trying to define for yourself, where do you fit in, and how do you fit in, and where do you feel like you fit in. I imagine those were some interesting, if not challenging, times for you
Mm.
as a child and teenager as you were growing up. So thank you for sharing all that. I really, really appreciate it.
Of course.
So the draw to Abu Dhabi, I'm assuming partly was the chance to have school paid for, or at least partially paid for. But what was the educational draw? Like, what did you go there for to learn and participate in? And tell me a little bit about that. How did you find that from being in Japan, because you were back in Japan at that point and finishing high school? How did you discover this program? I mean, that to me is like, how did you get from Osaka to Abu Dhabi as an 18-year-old? That's another big leap at a young age.
Yeah, well, so my sister was actually already enrolled at NYU Abu Dhabi. And I think going through a fairly unique upbringing, I'm so grateful that I had a sibling, because there was someone else who kind of knew what it meant to bridge those worlds. And we had actually been living in separate countries since we were 13, because she went to New Zealand first, and then I went to New Zealand, and then she did a kind of high school scholarship thing and then went to NYU Abu Dhabi. So we hadn't been living in the same country for 5 years. And so that was a big draw and kind of like a sense of home that I already had in the UAE.
Nice.
And I mean, educationally, it's very fun and exciting to go to NYU, because they have so many campuses around the world. And so they have the Abu Dhabi campus, of course, the New York kind of mother campus.
Yeah.
They also have one in Shanghai. And those are the three main ones. But then they have like all these other campuses that you can do a semester abroad in. So I think in terms of a kind of open up your world global educational experience, that was very much what they were offering. And I got to do one semester in the main campus in New York. I did one in Florence, which was very beautiful.
Nice.
And then 3 years in the Emirates. So I think just that kind of chance to explore and learn new things and interact with new cultures and languages was what I was really excited about.
Nice. And what was the undergrad degree that you were pursuing?
Yeah, so I mean, I think if you looked at my transcript, you would have no idea what I majored in, like at all. I think I was taking so many kind of music classes and Arabic classes. In the very first week of arriving, I remember at first I was enrolled in the kind of like hardcore sciences sequence. And then at orientation, they were like, play another octave of the piano. That's what they used to say to us. It's like, just try something new.
Yeah.
And so I dropped the sequence, and then I enrolled in like music of the Middle East, and then just like started taking some classes that I just never thought I would interact with otherwise. But then it kind of came to the end of my first year, and they kind of start to say, okay, you might need to choose a major, choose a lane.
Yeah.
And in my very first year, I mean, I think a very exciting and pivotal experience for me was that I got to be part of the UAE's very first student delegation to the UN COP conference.
Oh, wow.
So that was the year that they were meeting in Paris, and I got to join the kind of UAE governmental delegation as a student trainee, in effect, and really watch this kind of, in my mind, the biggest climate agreement of my generation.
Paris Accords, you were there for oh my goodness.
Be written, and negotiated. I was there for that. It was just kind of crazy.
Wow.
And I was already really excited and interested by kind of environmental sciences, climate, and going to that conference started to make me think about like, oh, like politics are actually really important for climate change. And in my mind, I was like, why would you do political science unless you want to be a politician? And that's not what I want. But then going to this, and I was like, wow, this is really exciting. And there's so much policy and like work to be done in this space. Then I ended up picking political science as a major. And it was actually such a interesting degree to gain in the UAE, because nothing was kind of taken for granted in ways that when I studied at NYU and took political science classes there was still these kind of assumptions in New York about like, well, of course, democracy is the best system, right? Versus taking that and taking classes in the UAE.
A simpler time.
Right. Right, but like you could really kind of explore these ideas at such a foundational
Yeah.
level
Yeah.
with students from literally all
All
corners
over.
of the
Yeah.
globe
Yeah.
in a
Wow.
country that is authoritarian and, but has pretty kind of like visionary ideas of how it governs itself. And also kind of interesting to go into this climate policy politics space in an oil rich country,
Sure.
and I think that
Sure.
that was always the way that I interacted in the climate space in the UAE. You very much have to kind of work with government because that is where things get done. And so
Yeah.
learning how to kind of be very cooperative in the climate space, and how do you push the needle from within and kind of build consolidated efforts towards something was something that I learned in the UAE.
Yeah. Makes
And
a lot of sense.
yeah, it was a very different way of kind of navigating the climate advocacy world.
Yeah. So you finished your degree plan, and then where did you end up going from
So
there?
I graduated 2019. I was
Yeah.
living in Abu Dhabi after that. I was working for the university doing a research fellowship.
Mm-hmm.
And then COVID hit in 2020.
Yeah, that thing.
I think at this point in life, I was like envisioning all of these kind of next moves. I think I was at the very final stages of interviews for a job in Paris.
Yeah.
And, it was very much a kind of like global climate policy development space. Then COVID hit and, they were not taking anyone. It was not already in Paris. Yeah. And my parents were in Australia. My sister was in Australia. So I took a repatriation flight to Australia, did hotel quarantine for 2 weeks, moved in with my parents. And they live in Cairns, which is such a beautiful part of the world. Actually, it's the only place where there's 2 World Heritage Sites meeting. So they live right where the Great Barrier Reef is, and then there's also the Daintree rainforest. So it was kind of like living in paradise in many ways.
Yeah.
But I was
Australian
also
map. That's up the coast, north of
all the way
Sydney.
up north.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
It's like one pocket of wet Australia. The rest is so dry, but there's just like a little bit of
nice
rainforest. And there's also, direct flights to Japan and like the closest part of Australia to Japan. So when they left Japan, they kind of didn't go that far.
This landed as quick as they could. Yeah.
Yeah. But I was living, in this really beautiful part of the world, and there was no COVID cases there. There was very hard border shutdowns, but within it was pretty normal. But at the same time, I was working this like remote job with collaborators all in the UAE at weird times of the night, and really not kind of meeting anyone. And so I started applying to jobs in Australia, and then ended up moving to Canberra, which is the capital.
Yeah.
Political
there.
capital.
Yeah.
I kind of think like Canberra's a bit like Ottawa of Canada, or maybe like Sacramento of California. Like it's not really known for anything except
it's just
government.
The capital, right? Yeah, I mean, they just built a city kind of in the middle of nowhere to be the capital, if I remember right from my visit there, and it's kind of a government city.
Yes, totally.
Yeah.
Knew no one in Canberra, but I was excited about this job because it was at a think tank, and I'd been following their work for a little while, and that was an incredible experience, actually. I mean, it was a tough learning curve because everyone has this kind of like shared climate and political context and of knowledge of living in Australia, and I just like had not had any of that. So they were just saying names and saying acronyms, and I was like, I have no idea what's happening for the first while. But it was just like the best deep dive into climate politics and policies in an Australian context. We got to work really directly with media, journalists, with politicians. And I think I really got to experience what it means to do research in a way that's timed for the moment, and how to communicate that to the right audiences that you need to share your research with
Yeah.
for that to actually have any kind of effect. And I'm really glad that that was the training that I had prior to a PhD, because it's very easy to do a PhD and, you know, not think about like
Miss
what
that part. Yeah.
happens
How are you going to
with the
communicate? Yeah.
research.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That part, they don't, that part of what do you do when it's done? Right.
That's
Yeah.
not part of the PhD curriculum.
Right. Right.
And I think also, you know, going back to this UAE contrast, it was just like a 180 recalibration in some ways, because we had a conservative government at the time that I was working. And a lot of the work of this think tank was to just like put pressure on government policies, right? So going from a place where I was very much like collaborative, working with, to like then being in a space where they're like, no, like for this to be effective, you have to call people out
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Being on the
like
outside
kind of
kind
be
of.
like, right, the one with the big microphone,
Yeah.
speaking out
Yeah.
against things.
Yeah.
And so that was also like a complete recalibration.
Yeah.
And it just goes to show, I think, that you have to, there's just no, like the context and culture really matters of
Absolutely.
the place that you're trying to affect change. And that method might look completely different in one place to another. And there's really, I mean, with the climate crisis, I think we talk about this all the time, but there's like no silver bullet, and there's going to have to be so many different people working in different ways to make progress.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, I think it's an incredibly important message, and for your experience to kind of, you know, so early in your career to be able to kind of have had real world experience working, you know, inside government and then working outside government, and because those two approaches are very different, and to be able to have both of those experiences and be able to bridge that gap, I think is really an important message of that you just delivered. It kind of takes it all. We all need to find that space and do a little bit of it. So I appreciate that. That's impressive. So how long did you stay at the think tank, and was the departure from the think tank because you got into Stanford, or so tell me a little bit about that transition.
So I got into Stanford and took some time, a few months off before moving to California, which was really nice. I'm very grateful that I got some more time with family, and then borders opened, so I kind of got to see different parts of my family before moving to California, and kind of knowing that it wouldn't necessarily be a time in the near future where I would have that.
Sure.
So moving to Stanford, I mean, I think it's kind of, in some ways it's a much easier transition than other transitions I've had, culturally anyway, from Australia.
Sure.
That said, I think it's a very intimidating place to be, and suddenly I just was like, I'm surrounded by geniuses, you know. And my first year was a little bit more challenging because I was taking basically just a lot of statistics classes, and they were really hard. I was kind of in this like statistics bubble, and then in my research I was looking at pretty big data sets, and mostly on the kind of like insurance side of things. And I think there was this kind of disconnect of, I came here because I'm really interested in climate resilience and working with frontline communities and having impact, and then feeling like I was like in this very beautiful place again, like I was in Australia, but really just like stuck in my room working on my problem sets.
Yeah.
You know, and then I really didn't feel that connected to the place that I was living. And I think that's something that I really value. Wherever I kind of live and move to, I really just want to get to know that place in a deeper way. And so then in my first summer, after my first year, I worked for a local government agency that works on flooding and sea level rise in San Mateo County. So, and that was just like the best thing I could have done, I think, just to spend a summer actually kind of embedding myself more in the local community that Stanford sits within, going to meetings, talking to people who are not university affiliated, you know, taking the train, commuting, living off campus. And so that was incredibly grounding. And I think I also, you know, started to see new avenues or just new perspectives on some of the research I had just started to do. So for example, in the kind of like flood insurance space, which I've been looking at, you read articles and you kind of look at the data, and it's very much this like prescriptive flood insurance is a good thing for people. It improves our ability to adapt to climate change. If you don't have it and you get hit, there's a bunch of research that says like how that leads to worse outcomes.
Yeah.
But then, when I was working at this local government agency, and then we had an opportunity to kind of do a little bit of site visits, and I spoke to one resident, and he was just saying like, we got mapped into the flood zone a few years ago, and I'm just trying to pay off my mortgage, but my flood insurance rate just keeps going up and up and up. And I wouldn't even make a claim if I got flooded because I'm so concerned that that's just going to bump my premium up and I'm going to have to pay more every month for the same flood insurance. And I can't get out of it until I pay off my mortgage.
Right.
So really exciting to kind of talking to people and having a very different perspective about what might be the best way forward, and seeing some disconnect in the kind of like high level prescribed policies versus like what's actually happening on the ground. And so I think that that's very much shaped the kind of direction that I wanted to have in my research. I decided after that summer that I wanted to have more community engaged work. And I think that when you kind of can marry a little bit of the big data sets and like looking at the numbers with the human experiences and stories, I think that's where it's like exciting to kind of contextualize both. So, we ended up doing a bunch of listening sessions with residents in collaboration with the agency One Shoreline, and then looking at those kind of transcripts and analyzing it in a systematic way. And one quote that I get reminded of that I think I mentioned at this conference was, someone said, "Oh, it's only me and the person across the street that buys flood insurance," right? And then if you look at the data, there's actually like over 150 houses in that one small neighborhood who are currently purchasing flood insurance.
Yeah.
But that person saying that there's only him and the other person, that is also really informative because that's his lived experience.
That's his perception, yeah.
Right. And so I think we kind of need both to understand what's happening.
Yeah.
And I think too often we kind of throw away the more on the ground experiences in favor of these like easy to measure metrics.
Yeah.
And so I think the way that we measure things is so interesting and deserves a second thought. So that's the kind of work that I get to do within the PhD.
Yeah. Well, I was so impressed by the presentation that you made in Chicago and the work that you did there in San Mateo and just the really grassroots community driven aspect of it, because that I've been in government most of my 25-year career, and I've been very fortunate to be part of many projects that were very community driven, but I've seen in government a whole lot of projects that are not. Yeah. And that prescribed kind of policy that this is top down as opposed to grassroots up really is an issue that needs to be discussed, and how can we change and evolve our systems, and I think you described it so well. It takes more time, to have that personal connection, to be in community, to do those listening sessions, to start to garner trust from the residents, and so that they'll share with you their stories, because you have to earn that trust before someone's just going to necessarily tell you their story. They're going to tell you what's wrong with you and what you're doing, but to get beyond that and to really hear their experience and then capture that so that it can be incorporated into better decision making. I mean, that it does take time and effort, which I think is why it's often an afterthought.
Mhm.
That the policymakers just, oh, we make a policy, we know what's best, and let's just implement the policy. And that, is, I think, why there's such a disconnect between, the residents and, the government that's there to serve them, because that communication, that connection is not always there. So I think it's so amazing what you're doing and so needed.
And it's a work in progress, right? I think
Absolutely.
I also struggle with it sometimes. It's not just government that has the kind of tension with community engaged work. I think academia traditionally
Sure.
also
That makes
is
sense. Yeah,
not
sure.
geared towards it.
Yeah.
There are pressures
The
within a
mythical ivory
PhD.
tower. Yeah.
Yes, there are pressures within the PhD to get things published and get things
Sure,
done on a
sure.
short
That makes sense.
timeline.
Yeah.
And I think that that's often not conducive to the kind of trust building that needs to happen to do
Yeah.
community engaged work. Thankfully, my advisors are very open to this kind of learning, and that's partially why I chose to work with them. And also, there's things that to this day we're trying to work through. For example, we're rolling out a program, hopefully in this next year, where we're going to be providing households with a certain budget, and they can get flood mitigation resources for their home, and we're going to track how that program goes over
Sure.
the time. And in like a pure research perspective, like ideally you would just want to randomize who gets to be enrolled in this program, and that's how, from like a scientific view,
Sure.
you get the most robust understanding of the project.
Yeah.
But our partner is a local government agency, and they would hate to do something that was just like, well, sorry, you're randomly selected not to
Yeah.
receive this resource, right? So there's always this kind of negotiating and trying to figure out like, okay, how do we still make sure we're most responding to the need in the community and being responsible, and making sure that people continue to trust us as a partner, while how do we be rigorous in the way that we measure this intervention. And so I think there's like continues to be many tensions that I'm trying to work through.
Yeah.
But I'm very convinced that it's a worthwhile way of learning things in this space.
Absolutely. So we've transitioned so well into your studies on your PhD program. In case it wasn't fully articulated for the audience, tell us a little bit about that. What exactly? I know you've shared the San Mateo story and this new project that you're working on to give folks look like direct resource, financial resource, to see how they then use that to do some, I'm assuming, sandbags or waterproofing or things of that nature for their home. But what is and I pulling up a little bit to 35,000 or 60,000 foot level? What is your PhD ultimately looking at and moving forward towards?
So, I mean, I think within my research career, I've very much focused on different kinds of climate hazards. And so I've done some projects on extreme heat or drought, air pollution, a little bit of wildfire, which I would love to do more of. But my PhD is very much focused on flooding in California, and thinking about the kind of like upstream to downstream, I guess, ways that the way that we manage floodplains can sometimes create disparities in the system that are often unintended, right? So starting from the way that we map flood risk, my first chapter is very focused on like how flood levies, for example, are accounted for in the way that we map flood risk, and then looking down to then like the insurance implications and insurance pricing, and then all the way down there's like then the recovery phase of like what happens when flooding hits and how are people coping with it, and that's very much like on the ground level. So I look at different kinds of points within the way that we're managing flood risk in California, and get to do a little bit of kind of California-wide data sets and like trying to map everything
Yeah.
to like really specific focused on one neighborhood project. So it's a really fun kind of taste from different parts of the cycle of, or different parts of the kind of river upstream downstream kind of
No, absolutely.
part of it. And it's still to be determined what exactly the dissertation form will
Yeah,
take.
still early.
Yeah, I still have a couple years left.
Yeah.
But that's the kind of unifying theme between the chapters of my dissertation.
Sure. Are you looking, I mean, I appreciate your explanation of that, and that, certainly the most vulnerable communities, I think particularly, flooding for certain, but I think if you look across the environmental hazards that are out there, the communities that are at the most risk are typically, lower socioeconomic communities. They're most vulnerable. They're the ones that certainly have, at least in the United States, I can speak to. I don't know about some of the other places you've lived in, but I imagine there's similarities. These vulnerable communities, frontline communities, have found themselves in those areas because of decades of systemic policy choices. I mean, the wealthiest neighborhoods are generally not the ones that are at the highest risk of flood damage. So, that historically was not by accident. Look back at redlining and things of that nature, where certain communities were often people of color and lower socioeconomic status. So does your research look at some of those systemic issues as well, outside of the mapping and the insurance industry, or is that just kind of an understanding that kind of is also part of the puzzle, but not necessarily part of the puzzle that you're focused on?
Yeah, so I mean, for the kind of higher level chapters that look more at how we actually map flood risk, we bring in like demographic data, and then really my first chapter is looking at San Joaquin Valley and the kind of Central Valley area and how those areas tend to have lower capacity to accredit their levee systems and get credit in flood mapping. So that definitely comes through the kind of like bird's eye view. And then I think even at the very community level that I'm working with, the neighborhood we work in it's called Bel Air. It's right next to San Francisco Airport. And I mean, the first time I visited, like, this is San Mateo County, we have like very wealthy people living here, maybe the wealthiest in the world, in Atherton and such. And then you just like drive 15 minutes and you arrive in Bel Air. And I think the first thing I noticed is just like there's a highway on my right. On my left, there's another highway bridge intersecting. Then every 15, 20 minutes, there's just like this thundering sound of an airplane going overhead. This neighborhood has been flooding every winter for the last few years.
Yeah.
And it's a very linguistically diverse population.
Sure.
And so in any of the work that we're doing there, you have to kind of understand all of the different stresses and vulnerabilities that are hitting people all at once. You have to make sure that we are translating our material or going with people who speak the languages that are spoken in the community. And I think also because they have had so much kind of flood experience, there's also just so much knowledge that I think when we're thinking about like after the listening sessions, moving into maybe a bit more solutions oriented, like helping people access specific resources to protect themselves from flooding, a lot of that has been grounded in, okay, what have people already done? What is working? What do people trust works?
Yeah.
And taking solutions really that people have already found on the ground in that context and just trying to elevate those or make that more accessible to everyone who lives on that street even. So I think there's also just so much knowledge and so much learning that I've done from interacting with folks in this community.
Sure. Yeah. And that it goes back to that getting on the ground and interacting and not coming in that, I'm from the government, I know better, or I'm
Mm-hmm.
from academia, I know better, but like listening to that community knowledge and wisdom that's there. They know where it's flooding, they know when it floods, why it
They
floods,
do.
how much
Yeah.
rain it takes to flood,
Yeah.
where the problem, where this street is impassable,
Totally.
or yeah, they know all that. So going in and
Mm-hmm.
listening to
And
them
when we
is
kind of
super important. Absolutely.
Yeah, when we came in, I think because we were coming with a little bit of this like government lens, we are like, okay, we could provide an early warning system. Like, what do you think about that? And people are just like, well, if it's raining, I know it's going to flood, so
Yeah.
I don't need that.
Yeah.
Like I think that we kind of tend to think that people are going to want one thing, and that we definitely kind of came in thinking that and
Sure.
having ideas of what the agency was already starting to work on and starting to do and what might be helpful. And I mean, it's been humbling really to
Yeah.
just like have to relearn. And a lot of the time it's even just been the kind of smaller things of people feeling like they're being heard and they have someone who they can talk to and they're not getting kind of siphoned off to the other next agency,
Yeah.
or
I mean, they pass you
yeah,
on to
not
somebody
being
else.
avoided.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's
All that's
helped.
critically important to building that trust and
Mm.
really, trying to help, trying to be there. Not here's what I have to help you, but what do you need so that you can be helped. And
Mm-hmm.
it changes that question, changes that initial assumption.
Yeah.
So Hannah, what as you know proceed through your final few years and eventually achieve your PhD, what's next for you? What are you going to, maybe too early to
Mm.
tell, but what's kind of the initial vision of where do
Mm.
you see yourself in a few years after you have your PhD framed nicely on the wall behind you?
Yeah, I mean, I think through this conversation, I'm realizing that, I like really started at the kind of like global COP level, and then
Yeah.
in Australia, focused on the
Like the
federal, and
biggest
now,
cop. Yeah.
right, and like was really interested in global policy, and then I worked in Australia on federal kind of nation level policy, and now I'm like truly at the local
Yeah.
local
The
level and on the ground,
neighborhood
and I'm
level. Yeah.
really really enjoying that, and the kind of how tangible it is, and just like once we set these goals, how do we actually get it done? So I think that I've kind of zoomed in a lot, and I imagine that after I finish the PhD, I'll probably kind of shift up a little bit broader focus.
Sure.
But I do want to have a role that's really rooted in the policy space and the implementation space within the climate resilience world. I would love to actually work in the kind of California government level. I think that would be super interesting.
Yeah.
I went to Sacramento for the first time this year, and I was like, oh, maybe this is where I want to be next.
Nice.
So watch this space. We'll see.
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe in my kind of broad future, I do think that there's like a role to play in the more kind of cultural translation intergovernmental space that could be a good fit.
Yeah.
Um, but I mean, I could have never predicted any of the any of the stages of my life so far, and so I don't pretend that I can really predict what's going to be
Yeah.
next for me.
Well, I'm sure it's going to be something amazing. You've already led such a full life, and I'm sure what you're moving on to next, whenever next shows up, it's going to be a great opportunity for you, and a one that we need, because whatever direction you go in at state level, stay at the local level, go back to the international level, or go back to Australia and stay at the national level, wherever
Mm.
your skill set and your knowledge and what you're bringing to policy development and policy implementation is needed. So you're going to make a great impact, I imagine, at whatever level you end up, or
Thank you.
how you continue to evolve through different levels as life may take you to different places. I am curious before I get to your call to action,
Mm.
knowing that your research is so heavily focused on flooding issues and National
Mhm.
Flood Insurance Program issues tied into the FEMA and the regulatory maps, the floodplain maps, and all of that. I'm without judging the good or bad of it or the right or wrong of it, but I'm assuming you're watching closely what's happening at our federal level with
Mhm.
the discussion around maybe doing away with FEMA and what would that mean for our nation and emergency management issues, and the fact that the National Flood Insurance Program is a law. It's not necessarily
Mhm.
just something run by the agency. The agency goes away, the law still exists. So I'm imagining you're paying attention to that because
Oh
it's going to
yeah.
have, I
Yeah.
assume, some pretty significant implications to your research that you're in the midst of. Is my
Mm.
imagination correct?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's really threw a spanner in the works, right? I was in DC this year for a kind of environmental policy workshop that Stanford does, and I got to talk to some folks in FEMA and the housing department, and there's been so many shifts, and my sense is that the National Flood Insurance Program won't be discontinued. Um, but I definitely started to raise some existential questions of like, oh, will my PhD be relevant by the time that it's
Yeah,
published?
yeah,
But I do think these trends are being seen in different parts of the world of just insurance becoming more and more unaffordable, of
sure.
governments trying to intervene. I think the US and California is such a fascinating space to focus on this because in the flood insurance level, it's like the federal government has just completely intervened in the market and provides flood insurance,
Yeah,
right? In California, in the home insurance market, there's a lot of state level regulations that
yeah,
limit how quickly your premiums can go up. And then that's created this kind of crisis point between insurance companies and the state level
yeah.
on like, well, then we're not even going to stay
We're
in
not
this
yet.
market
Right.
because we can't afford to do business here. In Australia, where my parents live, they've recently intervened in the insurance market at the federal level by kind of every time there's a cyclone, which is the same as a hurricane, just
Yeah.
kind of southern hemisphere,
Yep.
of kind of underwriting insurance companies from the federal government for cyclone damage. And so I think as more and more we're seeing different governments
Yeah.
and places try their hand at trying to regulate or provide or somehow intervene in the insurance market, and it's such an interesting and fascinating time to be looking at that. And I do think that California especially is kind of like at the very front end of having to deal with this, and
Yeah.
so there's things to be learned from all of these kind of changes and crises that are happening for the rest of the world as well as within the US.
Absolutely. Yeah. Regardless of what happens with FEMA, your PhD program is going to be very relevant because these FEMA existing or not existing, the National Flood Insurance Program existing or not existing isn't going to change the fact that flooding in low-lying areas is going to continue to get worse as climate
Yeah.
predictions are, drought punctuated by heavy downpours, so flooding's going to get worse, rising sea levels, coastal flooding is going to get worse. And if you're in a community that has a chance of rainfall and coastal flooding, getting that double whammy, you're in a whole lot of trouble. Fires
Hmm.
and just the climate catastrophes that are already happening and undoubtedly going to continue to happen for the next few decades until hopefully we can right the global ship we're all living on. That space that you're entering about government policy, private sector insurance, all of that is going to be needed immensely as we navigate these next few decades of how do we manage flooding
Hmm.
and forest fires and hurricanes, cyclones. Just the storms are going to continue to come, and your work is
Yeah.
going to be incredibly needed and useful. So that's what I'm like. You're gonna be fine. You're gonna be helping whatever level of government you end up on. Your knowledge and your research base is going to be needed and useful. So I'm grateful to know you and others like you are out there doing, important work, because we need it. We need it. So
Likewise, grateful to know you and all the
yeah,
people who are like actually in the jobs dealing with this right now, right? I get to look at it from a research perspective, but I
yeah,
really am so appreciative of the times that I get to talk to folks who are really doing this work already.
yeah. Well, there's more to do. So thank you for joining us.
Great.
Well, Hannah, what's your call to action? Now that folks have heard your story and gotten to know you a little bit better, what do you want people to do with this information? How can they support you or your work, or what do you want them to do in their own communities? So what's your call to action for folks?
I think that the first kind of way to be more resilient in the climate crisis is just like get to know your neighbors. And I've been in this phase in the last year. I've really gotten to know my neighbors in California, and I'm so excited and happy that I do that, do have that community. And I think it's something that working in San Bruno too, I think maybe the biggest impact we've had so far from this engagement is just kind of connecting folks within that street and neighborhood, so that there is more kind of interconnectedness
Yeah,
and reliance that we can build. And so I think I think I would love to leave people with that, is if you don't yet have a relationship, knock on that neighbor's door, leave them a note, and see if you guys can just, I don't know, spend some time together, or leave each other's numbers, or just have a sense of like, is there anyone who's elderly, or do
yeah,
they need extra support? And then I think in the insurance side of things, taking a long video, walking through your house and taking a video of everything in your house before anything happens is great if you have insurance. And for those of us like me who are renters and don't even think about insurance in our day to day,
yeah,
I think that that's like a piece that I'm really interested in, that I feel like is a massive gap of like thinking about how do we better protect renters in a disaster situation. And so if there's anyone who's equally excited about this, reach out to me and let's think about renters in this space and think about how we can do better research or better kind of support for that demographic specifically.
perfect. And I'll put your LinkedIn
Yeah,
information on the show notes
perfect.
so folks can reach out to you and follow your work. And yeah, if somebody has an idea of that renter space, yeah, that's a big gap. That is a space that needs to be looked at. I agree completely. So, well, I appreciate that call to action, particularly the community one as well. I mean, it seems
Mm.
to fly in the face of the world that we live in, where we're all on our little screens and we're all isolated. But yeah, community resilience starts with knowing your neighbors and knowing your community and being a part of a community. That's how
Mm.
we can strengthen resilience. So I think that's such a powerful bit of advice to the audience as well. So thank you for sharing that. So, well, Hannah, in a few minutes we have left, I want to talk to you about hope. I want to get your idea. I do this at the end of every show. And, we talk about hard things, flooding and, you know, first line communities, vulnerable communities, and the climate crisis that we're in. These are real big problems, and these are real big challenges that we're all facing, and sometimes they can feel overwhelming. So I always like to end every episode on an upbeat note, talking about hopes for the future. So, and I appreciate hope from the professional kind of research perspective. It's not just a fluffy pink cloud emotion. It's actually a mindset.
Mm.
Those who study hope, that has three characteristics. You can have a vision for a better future. You have some sort of plan of how to get there. You might not have every step figured out, but you have a direction at least to walk in, to get to that better future. And you have a sense of agency, that there's something you can do about it. Probably can't do it all by yourself, which is why we need community. But those three aspects, if someone has a vision, a sense of direction, and some sense of agency that they can get there, they're generally more hopeful. and then folks who are lacking some of those characteristics. So I'm going to ask you 3 questions, and I'd ask that you just kind of give your first kind of heartfelt thought response. Don't think too deeply about it. I just kind of want to get your instant reaction to the question. So, ready to talk about your hopes for the future?
I'm ready.
First question, Hannah, is what's your vision for a better future? It can be for you personally or professionally or for the world, but what's your vision for a better future?
I think I would love to just see more curiosity in the world. And I think curiosity it can manifest at very different levels. I think curiosity for each other, curiosity for ourselves, or curiosity for the environment that we live in. A big part of what's helped me in the kind of transitions through my life is realizing about myself that actually, like, I have a very specific worldview because I have had these very specific
Sure,
experiences.
sure.
And I think the more that we can kind of get to know ourselves, it also makes us more curious about, okay, why does this person think that the way that they think in, and what are the life experiences that maybe brought them to that? And I think that that's a way where we could have a world that's a bit more understanding, a little bit less judgmental,
Yeah,
and a little bit more collaborative.
yeah. Love that. So I think you started to lean in to this the second answer already, but let me just throw the question out there so you can provide a little bit more in depth to the answer. But why is that important to you that we're more curious?
Hmm.
Tell me a bit more.
I mean, I guess I'm very biased because I'm out here doing a PhD, and I get to be funded to study whatever I'm curious about. And so I think, the most interesting parts of my life and moments have been because I was just curious to get to know someone or have a conversation with someone I didn't know, or I just feel like that has just served me personally in ways that I couldn't predict for myself. So I think that there's like a lot of value in having curiosity drive your actions. And I think for the world too, especially now, it feels like there's a lot of division and a lot of you kind of like fear around what you don't know,
Yeah,
and misconceptions about certain religions or sexualities, or whatever it may be.
yeah,
And I think that if we are just a little bit more curious and open to getting to know other people's perspectives and life experiences, and like once you know someone deeply, like you're going to care about them, and once you know an environment deeply, you're going to care about that environment. And
yeah.
I think we just need to be invested. I would love to be in a world where we just feel more invested in ourselves, other people, and also the environment.
Yeah, we definitely take care of what we know and love. So getting to know and love others and getting to know and love our communities and our environments will definitely help facilitate that desire to take care of them. So I love that answer. So last question for you, Hannah. Imagine now the future you just described is actually the world we're living in now. People are more curious. There's less judgment being passed. There's less fear of the unknown or the person who's different. And there's this general sense of understanding and appreciation that you described, that we're willing to learn and grow together and care for each other in our shared space and environment. So that's the world we're living in right now.
Mm.
How does that make you feel?
Hmm. I think if it makes me feel more connected. It makes me feel like we live in such a rich place and that we can appreciate it. And I think it makes me feel just like hopeful, because if we are in this place where we're curious and collaborative, then like we can do so much more,
Yeah, yeah,
and especially in like the climate world where we have so much to do. I think that if we're starting in that place of connection and curiosity and openness, we can shoot for the stars in ways that right now feels like we're just kind of on the back foot a little bit. But
yeah.
We can get there, if that is really like how we're coming and showing up to each other.
Perfect. Well, Hannah, I'm going to do my part to make your vision come to pass, because I believe in that vision as well. I believe in the power of curiosity, and not be quick to judge, and to try to understand and ask questions and learn, and the peace and understanding that can bring on so many different levels. So I'll do my part to help make your
Yay.
world and your vision come to pass, and I know you'll undoubtedly be doing your part. So thank you so much for joining me today on Stories Sustain Us, and sharing your journey and your vision for a better future. I'll leave you with the last word.
Thank you so much, Stephen, for creating this space. I think that, like, I mean, you have a full other job, and like a whole other world that you're managing. And so it's really exciting that you are spending your time, your free time, doing this after work. And clearly you have to be a very curious person to want to get to know someone for an hour. So it's been such a pleasure. And thank you for having me. And next time, I would love to learn your story.
Fair enough. I look forward to that next time. Thanks, Hannah, for
Thank
being
you.
here, and I wish you all the best. Take care.
You too.
What an enjoyable conversation with Hannah Melville-Rea. Today we explored how her multicultural upbringing shaped her worldview, her journey from the global stage at COP21 in Paris to national climate policy in Australia, and now her community-based research in California on flooding and insurance equity. Hannah reminded us that real resilience comes when we connect data and policy with the lived experiences of frontline communities. And her call to action, get to know your neighbors, is one of the simplest yet most powerful steps any of us can take toward building stronger, more resilient communities. I want to pause and reflect on a few things Hannah said that really stuck with me. First, let's go back to COP21. If you're not aware, COP stands for the Conference of the Parties under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. The last COP, COP29, was held just under a year ago, and COP30 is coming up this November in Brazil. COP21 in Paris was historic because it's where the Paris Agreement was adopted. That agreement, signed by nearly every nation on Earth, committed the world to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius, with efforts to hold it at 1.5 degrees. What an extraordinary moment in history, and how special it must have been for Hannah, still a student at the time, to witness it firsthand as part of a delegation. Imagine being there in the room as one of the most consequential climate agreements was signed into existence. I'm being a little bit honest, I'm probably a little bit envious, but it's such an incredible story from Hannah, and what a great way to kick off her career. Second, Hannah's call to action to get to know your neighbors really resonates with me. To live isolated life these days, often fueling what many call an epidemic of loneliness. But when crisis strikes, whether that's a flood, a wildfire, or a power outage, or some other disaster, our neighbors are often the first people we turn to. If you know them, they'll be there for you to help you when you need it, and you'll be there to help them, especially if some of your neighbors are elderly, have disabilities, or other special needs. It doesn't just make our neighborhoods safer and stronger, it strengthens our own sense of belonging, and that's something every one of us needs. Third, I was really moved by Hannah's hope for the future, that people become more curious. That's brilliant advice. I learned long ago about this idea of avoiding contempt prior to investigation. It's okay to admit you don't know everything. In fact, there's strength in that. The truth is, uncertainty is uncomfortable, and humans crave certainty, even when it's an illusion. That's why curiosity is so powerful. Instead of asking, what's wrong with you, when you encounter someone different, ask, what happened to you? What's your story? That shift from judgment to curiosity changes everything, and it applies to our own thoughts as well. Just because a thought or belief pops into our own head doesn't make it true. Questioning our own assumptions is part of resilience and growth. So I want to thank Hannah again for her openness and her wisdom today. And I want to encourage all of you listening or watching, take action in your own community. Knock on a neighbor's door, share phone numbers, organize a block gathering, or simply check in on someone who might need extra support. Those small steps build resilience, the kind that data and policies alone can't provide. Now, if you'd like to support Stories Sustain Us and help me continue sharing conversations like this, please visit the support page at storiessustainus.com. There you can find ways to like, share, and subscribe to the show, follow me on social media, leave a comment, or, if you're able, provide financial support to help offset the costs of producing this weekly program. Every bit of support matters, financial or not, and I sincerely appreciate all that you've done to help me grow this show and reach more people. Thank you for being part of this journey with me. And I've got a quick programming note for you. This is the last new episode for a little while. Stories Sustain Us will return on September 30th with another inspirational guest. I'm taking a month-long vacation from the show, and in today's hustle and grind culture, that's a bit of an act of rebellion. But the truth is, breaks matter. They recharge our creativity, productivity, and well-being. I've been producing this show now for almost a year and a half without much of a pause, and it's time to relax, reset, and come back strong. I already have some incredible guests lined up for the fall, so please mark your calendar and catch the next new episode of Stories Sustain Us on September 30th. As always, you can get it at storiessustainus.com, on YouTube, or wherever you listen to podcasts. In the meantime, I invite you to take a break if you need one, or catch up on past episodes you might have missed. To all my audience, thank you so very much for being here, for your support, and for your own efforts to make the world a better place. Till next time, I'm Stephen Shower. Please take care of yourself and each other. Take care.